Welcome back to This Explainer. Today we're tackling the notoriously tricky math of capital gains tax when you're only selling a piece of an asset. We're going to break down the rules, the formulas, and the reliefs so you know exactly what to do when you're parting with just a fraction of your property. Before we get totally lost in the weeds, let's just quickly frame where capital gains tax actually fits into the broader picture of disposing of capital assets. When you dispose of a capital asset, it branches out into different tax considerations. We are laser-focused on that left branch, capital gains tax, and specifically the basic rules that apply when you aren't selling the whole thing, but just a part of it. Right, let's dive into the core problem here. Think about it. If you sell just a slice of a pie, how on earth do you figure out how much that specific slice originally cost to make? You absolutely can't just guess. The tax rules require a precise calculation to determine your allowable cost for that specific piece you are handing over. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The part disposal problem. 2. Cracking the cost formula. 3. Small land disposal relief. And 4. Smart tax planning considerations. All right, part 1, the part disposal problem. Okay, here is your golden rule, the universal part disposal cost formula. It applies to both your original cost and any enhancement expenditure that applies equally to the whole asset. To find your allowable cost for just the part you're selling, you take the original cost and multiply it by A over A plus B. Let's make this intuitive. A is simply what you sold the slice for, right? The gross consideration. And B is the market value of the pie you have left over, measured exactly at the time of the part disposal. So you're essentially just finding the ratio of what you sold to the total value of the asset at the time of sale and applying that ratio to your original cost. Now, you've got to be super careful with enhancements, though. If you spent money improving the asset, the tax treatment depends entirely on where that money actually went. If the cost was completely for the part you're selling, boom, you deduct it in full in your current computation. But if it was for the part you're keeping, well, you can't deduct a single penny right now. You literally have to save that deduction for when you eventually sell the rest of the asset. Moving on to part 2, cracking the cost formula. Let's put this into practice with a real scenario. Imagine you've got an estate that originally cost you £30,000. You decide to sell off a 1-hectare slice for £9,500. And let's say at the exact time of this sale, the rest of the estate, the remainder you're holding on to, is valued at £80,000. So we need to figure out the allowable cost of that single hectare. So we plug our numbers into the formula. We've got £30,000 times £9,500 over the sum of £9,500 and £80,000. Do the math, and we find the allowable cost of our single hectare is £3,184. Subtracting that cost from our £9,500 sale proceeds leaves us with a chargeable gain of £6,316. But wait, how do we handle the leftovers? It's actually pretty straightforward. We simply subtract the allowable cost we just used, that £3,184, straight from the original $30,000. This gives us our new lower base cost of £26,816. And that's the number we'll use for whenever we eventually sell the rest of the estate. All right, part 3, small land disposal relief. But what if the slice of land you're selling is just a tiny, tiny sliver? Do we really always have to do this complex A over A plus B calculation? Well, enter the small part disposal relief. This is a very special exception where you can bypass the standard formula entirely. But catch is, you can only use it if you meet 2 extremely strict mathematical conditions. First, the proceeds have to be less than 20% of the value of the land and buildings before the disposal. And second, the total of all your land sales in that specific tax year must be less than £20,000. Hit both marks, you can elect for the special treatment. Now, if you do elect for this relief, you're essentially kicking the tax can down the road. It's pretty clever. Instead of calculating a gain right now, you just deduct your small proceeds straight from the original cost of the asset. This reduces the base cost of the part you're retaining, which totally defers the gain today, but, and this is a big but, it guarantees a much bigger tax hit when you sell the remainder later, simply because your base cost is now lower. Which brings us perfectly to part 4, smart tax planning considerations. So, knowing exactly when to use this relief, and maybe more importantly, when to ignore it, is absolutely crucial. Since making the election defers your tax liability into the future, you really have to ask yourself, is delaying the pain actually the most strategic financial move for you right now? Just because you can defer a tax doesn't always mean you should. To make that decision, you've got to look at all the moving parts. Like, if you have annual exempt amounts available right now that would otherwise just go to waste, it might actually be way cheaper to take the tax hit today, use up your exemption, rather than deferring it to a year when you might not have that exemption available at all. You also really need to consider if you'll be in a higher tax bracket in the future. I mean, if you defer the gain and the tax rates hike up when you finally sell the rest of the asset, you could end up paying significantly more. Ultimately, part disposals require you to really map out your long-term strategy. It leaves you to ponder whether deferring a small gain today is actually worth the cost of a much larger calculation and potentially a much larger tax bill tomorrow. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If you sell a slice of the pie today, are you mathematically prepared for the tax bite on the rest of the pie tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy planning.